Good evening! Today we have a bit of a detour from my usual lore-related plans to discuss a topic that most people seem confused about. That being the weird, incongruous nature of both of Rainworld's DLCs. If you, a watcher of a Rainworld video, somehow aren't aware, Rainworld has two DLCs, Rainworld Downpour and Rainworld the Watcher. But these DLCs have something interesting about them. Usually when there are two pieces of content for a single particular property, they're viewed as complementary pieces of canon, both contributing to the same story and building off each other. But in this case, they're viewed as competing ones telling completely different stories. This is abnormal for obvious reasons, and in my last video I sort of discussed it a little bit, but I didn't go super into depth. So that's going to be the purpose of this video. Not only am I going to be discussing the topic of their canonicity, but I'm also going to be discussing their innate differences and why one might prefer one over the other. I'll try to be objective here and keep my personal biases out of it, but I am only human, so there's going to be a little bit of leakage here and there. Oh yeah, and there will be spoilers for both Downpour and The Watcher, so if you haven't played one or the other and you really want to, maybe skip out on this video. Starting out, let's hop into why I think a lot of people are going to be watching this video. For all those people in my recent lore videos that seem incredibly confused about why I was suddenly calling Downpour non-canon, let me discuss the canonicity of the two DLCs. Aren't you lucky I didn't put this at the end of the video so you could just get it to it immediately? Ha, like and subscribe. The first thing we need to discuss when differentiating the canonicity of the two DLCs is discussing the people who made them. First things first, the base game of Rainworld is fairly obvious. It was made by Video Cult, but the names we need to really remember here are Joar Jakobsen and James Primate. A few years after the release of the base game, a mod called the More Slugcats mod started development. This mod was pretty self-explanatory in what it did. It aimed to add more Slugcats. Eventually, the mod grew in scope, turning into the Many Slugcats expansion, a community project led by Andrew Marrero. And after a long legal battle with Adult Swim Games, the first publisher of Rainworld, they moved to Akupara Games, and the Video Cult team started to talk with Andrew Marrero and his team about adding in the Mini Slugcats expansion, as well as a few other really good mods like Jolly Co-op and Expedition, into an official expansion called Rainworld Downpour. During the Rainworld Downpour development cycle, a lot of new people were added, most of which were Rainworld modders before becoming part of the official team. The team ballooned from about 4 people to easily over 25. After the release of Rainworld Downpour, a project created, led, and developed primarily by modders that were just brought into the team, that the original devs probably also wanted a bit of a hand in the creation of the next DLC, that being Rainworld the Watcher, which was led primarily by James Primate. Now, the Watcher is also a DLC made of a lot of mods, primarily region mods, but I mean, this makes the canonicity debates kinda easy, right? Downpour was made by modders exclusively, so it's not canon. Watcher was directed by James Primate, so it is canon, open and shut case. However, despite this, the topic of canonicity is a bit more complicated than that. The base game is obviously canon to the base game, but with the way that The Watcher is, it can easily be ignored as a connection to the base game completely. Additionally, I wouldn't consider Downpour to be non-canon, it's just canon to itself. It's still official Rainworld media, it's DLC you can buy on the Steam page. The way that at least I see it is that Watcher and Downpour are not canon to each other, and are arguably non-canon to the original story of the base game, but the base game is canon to Watcher and Downpour. So when discussing lore, we ideally should not be utilizing facts that we learn from Downpour to theorize about stuff we learn in Watcher, and vice versa. So due to this fact, does that mean that Watcher and Downpour do not matter? No, it fucking doesn't. Don't let people imply that Downpour doesn't matter or isn't good because it's not canon to the base game. It's still art and it still bangs. Sorry to be crass, but if you like Downpour, a lot of Downpour still matters. The lore of Downpour still matters. Saint's story doesn't not matter suddenly. It's still Rainworld lore that is in the game and accessible and should be taken seriously and probably discussed further. We just probably won't get more explanations on Saint anytime soon. But with the big discussion of canonicity out of the way, it's time that we move on to the big cheese, which is the discussion of the differences between the DLCs. Think of this section as a bit of a review of both DLCs that attempts to discuss their strengths and weaknesses in comparison to each other. And again, I do feel the need to warn you that this might be a bit opinionated, so take what I say with a grain of salt, and just remember that if you disagree with me, it's your fault for having incorrect opinions. Alrighty, let's start with the main differences between the two. I mean, it's fairly obvious. One of the DLCs focuses on 5 different slug cats, whereas another focuses on a single one. That's obvious. I mean, you can tell that just by looking at the poster. What's more interesting to discuss are the more unique differences in gameplay and storytelling. Let's start out with Downpour. I personally like to describe Downpour as a character DLC. For obvious reasons, it adds 5 of them. But it's more specifically about the actual implementation of what it adds. The main gameplay of Downpour takes place over 5 separate campaigns, each one telling a different story at a different point in the timeline, where most of the interesting gimmicks of the campaign come from experiencing the game as that slugcat, sometimes exploring new regions, but it's primarily a different flavor of the basic Survivor experience. Every campaign is based off the same map, with some additions or revamps here and there. For example, Gourmand is literally the exact same map, except with a drastically different player character that changes up the entire gameplay flow to match around it, and also has an extra area tacked on at the end. Artificer, on the other hand, is effectively a whole different game mode, focusing on killing everything you see with a nimble, combat-heavy playstyle. Every slugcat feels like a different flavor of the main story, that's why there are so many of them. Even Saint, easily the most unique of them all, still feels like it's been cut from the same cloth as the base game. The focus is on the new characters, and this also applies to the writing. Downpour has a lot of wide-reaching reveals, showing 5 pebbles collapse from the beginning to the end. We explore all over the timeline, seeing fully functional looks to the moon, as well as exploring the end of the entire story as Saint. It's a really wide DLC, but overall the main thing it adds onto are the characters of Moon and Pebbles. Even if we literally see how the fucking world ends, it doesn't really matter as much as the reveals that we get about our 2 main characters. We see how their fallout begins, we see Pebbles apologize, and then we see them both ascend into a new plane of existence by the hands of the Saint. Spearmaster and Rivulet are almost exclusively about the relationship between these 2 iterators. Hell, even in the lore DLC, being the Saint, the main emotional hits still involve Pebbles and Moon. The whole DLC is primarily focusing on expanding on the characters and story of Rainworld, with a comparatively low focus on the actual world building itself. Now on the opposite hand, we have the Watcher. The Watcher is what I like to call an environment DLC. This is a bit less obvious than Downpour being a character DLC, but let me explain. The Watcher takes place with one single slugcat and wastes no time immediately transporting you out of the main game's map, only sending you back in horribly rotted variants of the regions. The gameplay loop is almost completely different. You navigate through portals instead of karma gates, approach combat differently, even karma's weird, now unlocking different powers as you gain more of it. Not to mention the actual size of the world itself. There are 27 new regions added in the Watcher. That is over double the base game's 12. They're all beautiful and fairly well designed, but there are only about 2 characters added. One of which explains a lot, but isn't anywhere near as verbose as Pebbles and Moon are, and another is so mysterious we still don't know what he even is. The amount of time the game spends telling you what is happening has been massively reduced. Pebbles and Moon aren't here at all. There aren't any lore pearls. There aren't any other echoes besides the one who started it all to talk to. The whole game feels a lot more restrained compared to Downpour, which seemingly wanted to explain everything up to and including how the world ends. I'm not saying this is any better, it's just very different. This is why I like to call the Watcher an environment DLC. Most of the storytelling and gameplay is done through exploration of new places, analyzing what the game shows us as opposed to what it tells us. As opposed to having a bunch of different characters to play, we now have one exceptionally large map, a notable portion larger than the base game, with a lot more nooks and crannies to pop into looking for areas. Even at the end of my Watcher playthrough, after getting both endings, I still think I only explored about 70% of the total rooms in the game, and I scoured that bitch. This is where I think the majority of the divisiveness comes into play, why some people would prefer one over the other. Downpour is a new player's DLC. Most of its appeal comes not only from its cute mascots, but also the additions to the enjoyability of Rainworld. It's no secret I wouldn't be playing this game right now if it weren't for the life that the modding scene breathed into it. It existed before, but nowhere near this level. Rainworld Remix especially was huge for this game. It added accessibility and customization features out the wazoo, and it shows with the boom the game experienced after Downpour came out. I was seeing people like Albino and Astral Spiff play the game, and the amount of players that flooded in from the increased publicity made this channel into what it is now. Watcher, on the other hand, is what I like to call a Veterans DLC, designed primarily for people who have already played Rainworld to enjoy. This is seen not only in the basic lack of marketability additions, but also in the basic gameplay philosophy. As opposed to attempting to draw in new players with a wide range of new additions, they invest into one super interesting addition that wouldn't really mean anything to anyone who hasn't played the game yet. Marketing-wise, it's kinda just Survivor with the colors inverted. This has led into a much smaller bump in player numbers from what I've seen. However, the absolute boom we've seen in the community's activity levels is almost unmatched. With an active dev team that is consistently promising future updates, we've been left in a state of almost perpetual hype, and I am absolutely itching to make more content now that my hyperfixation has been successfully buried in the dirt. But back to the topic of preferences. It's no secret that I personally prefer the Watcher over Downpour, but I know that's not the common opinion. I described it very bluntly in my stream, and I don't mean to sound dismissive when I say that Downpour was for people who liked the Slugcats and Watcher was for people that liked the lore. Downpour focused a lot on the more easily digestible aspects of Rainworld, like the cuteness of the Slugcats and the tragedy of its two primary characters, whereas the Watcher brought a lot more questions about the nature of the world itself, the cycle, echoes, the ancients, and this new ripple nonsense in the middle of all of it. There's a reason why a lot of people seem disappointed with the Watcher's story. It's hard to discern. There's very little actual dialogue. What it adds and says feels lesser to Downpour because it's harder to see. At least in my opinion. I know some people are going to think I'm calling Downpour fans stupid. I'm not. Downpour rules. But it's just a factually easier piece of media to understand. Now, I also think that a notable portion of the negativity and divisiveness can also be attributed to recency bias, or the opposite of recency bias, whatever that's called. For example, you'll often see newer DLCs touted as better because the excitement is still there, and because it feels more recent. You haven't had time to explore it and get tired of it yet. While the opposite is also true, where the newer thing could also be viewed as worse because you're not as used to it as you are the other thing. The main reason why I say this is to call out the common argument against the Watcher that I feel like doesn't really make a lot of sense, which is that it's not player-friendly at all, and this is somehow a new thing. Did you forget what game we're playing? Did you forget that Downpour added Miros vultures? I can understand thinking that the Watcher is the worst DLC based off the fact that it's a little bit unpolished. For example, the barnacles are bad. The map being not very connected is bad. However, Downpour also had a lot of flaws. If you're having trouble remembering, play through Spearmaster without passaging, go through the left side of Rubicon, go through the Rot without looking up a map. Try to go through past garbage wastes. Now, I don't say this to shit on Downpour, not at all. I love Downpour. But I just want to remind you that Rainworld has always been known for player-hostile gameplay, for better or for worse. The Watcher has its flaws, don't get me wrong, but so does every other piece of content. This is effectively just me telling you not to fight over it. Now, I will also admit that it's quite obvious that the Watcher was a little bit rushed out of the gate. The lack of polish on things like the barnacles and the abundance of post-release patches definitely suggest that, as well as the promise of future updates when Downpour had none anywhere near the level Watcher has. Even simple little things, like the Watcher not having Jolly co-op support or being available to select an arena mode, display the fact that the DLC didn't really have the extra time or polish that it needed. Now, I'm hoping that I'm wrong. I want to believe that Akupara is a good publisher who respects game devs enough to give them the time they need to make things really perfect, and that it was just a dev oversight instead of a publisher issue. Either way, I hope that saying that doesn't cuck me out of any more cool dev interviews. I'll be a good boy from now on, I promise. I just kinda had to get that out there. Now, I really don't want this video to be a guide on which to buy over the other. I think both of them are incredible DLCs and you should buy both of them. I want this video to be my hat in the ring of the Watcher vs. Downpour ordeal, as well as clarifying the way I will be looking at the DLCs individually in the future. It's no secret that Watcher will be the main focus of the channel from here on out, that's just how content works. But I don't want y'all to go around thinking that I've suddenly disregarded Downpour because I just don't like it, and I don't want anyone to tell anyone that they're wrong for preferring one interpretation of the story over the other. Canonicity in a story like this is entirely subjective. Both Downpour and The Watcher are canon. They are their own canons. Downpour isn't a fan fiction, it's in the game on the Steam page. You can buy it and the money goes to the devs. Just because it wasn't made by Jor and James Video Cult doesn't mean that it's not a valid piece of media in the universe. Now, I personally think that Downpour not being canon to Watcher is a little dumb and more than just a little bit confusing, but I didn't make the game. Generally, though, and I'm telling this to everyone in the community, don't alienate people. The lore is hard to understand, that's no secret. If you prefer Downpour over The Watcher, or vice versa, don't let some elitist lore head tell you that Downpour is a worse DLC or doesn't matter just because it was made by a different team. Anyway, that's my PSA out of the way. The main point I wanted to address in this video is just that, though, that the DLCs are different and to look at them as different interpretations of the same media made by different people. Which interpretation you prefer is up to you. It was a lot easier to just say that in 2 sentences as opposed to devoting an entire video on it. Why did I spend 10 minutes on this again? Oh right, money.